April 26, 1986, at exactly 1:23 in the morning, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. What begun as a routine safety test became the worst nuclear disaster in history. The explosion tore through the reactor, exposing its core and releasing radioactive material into the atmosphere. Firefighters rushed towards the flames, workers searched for answers, families slept only miles away, unaware that the danger was already drifting through the air. The radioactive cloud would spread far beyond the plant itself. It would cross through Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and much of Europe. Yet on that first night, few people understood what had happened. Radiation could not be seen. It could not be smelled. It moved silently through the darkness. Tonight, 1 month later, we return to Chernobyl, not to tell a story of monsters or haunted houses, but to listen to the voices left behind. Some lost their homes, some lost their health, some lost their trust of an entire nation. Others witnessed the land itself transformed. As you hear these stories, remember that every detail comes from a real tragedy. The reactor exploded in seconds, but its consequences would last generations. Our first voice comes from the city of Pripyat. Once a thriving community of nearly 50,000 people, today it sits empty. Apartments remain furnished, classrooms remain untouched, toys still wait for children who never returned. Listen carefully, the city still has a story to tell. April 26, 1986, began in a fraction of a second. But a disaster like Chernobyl does not stay contained in the moment of its creation. It ripples outwards, expanding across decades, transforming everything it touches. Tonight we heard stories of 4 distinct tragedies. We felt the heartbreak of Pripyat, a city frozen in time, where family histories were cut short and left to gather dust in empty corridors. We faced the chilling reality of the Soviet Union, where desperate struggle to maintain an illusion of control proved just as toxic as the radioactive cloud drifting across Europe. And we look upon the exclusion zone, a landscape where nature is forced to adapt to our worst mistakes, and where the financial ledger remains open, accumulating billion in cleanup costs that the young nations are still paying today. The concrete sarcophagus may seal the ruins of the reactor number 4, but the lessons of the night cannot be buried. Chernobyl remains a stark, enduring mirror. It stands as an eternal reminder that progress without accountability and power, without truth, carries a price too catastrophic for the world to bear. The voices of the past have spoken. The heavy burden of containment belongs to the present, but the choice of how we listen, that belongs entirely to the future.
I remember when Pripyat was alive. The streets were filled with workers and families. Children raced through playgrounds. We were happy, oblivious to the events that would take place in late April at Chernobyl. People believed that they lived in a modern city built for the future. The power plant provided jobs and stability and pride. Nobody could fathom that the very source of energy and income for so many workers in the city would cause such downfall. Then came the night of April 26. Some people woke to a strange glow above the reactor. Others heard sounds that they could not explain. We looked outside and saw light in the distance. Nobody understood that the air itself had become dangerous. We didn't know about the radioactive, silent killers in our midst. The next morning, life continued. Schools opened, children played outside, families shopped for food. my family and I went about our daily lives, living as though all would be okay. And nobody warned us. Nobody even explained what had happened. We were completely in the dark. Meanwhile, firefighters and plant workers were already becoming sick. They experienced nausea, vomiting, burns, and symptoms that doctors struggled to understand. Many had received enormous radiation doses with doses of up to 20,000 milligrays. Some liquidators and firefighters were exposed to levels high enough to be fatal, which soon became apparent with the deaths of 30 brave liquidators suffering from acute radiation syndrome. One firefighter later remembered joking with his co-workers, saying that they would be lucky to survive until the morning. For many, that joke became a reality. I wish that they had known. Days later, buses arrived and we were told to pack only the essentials. Officials said that we would return in a few days. We left photographs, toys, and treasured belongings behind. We left everything behind, not knowing it would be the last time we would ever reside in our homes. We believed that we would eventually go back, but we never did. I returned to my home as a ghost, taking in all of the memories that lurk these halls, and I miss my family so much. The disaster followed us long after evacuation. Radioactive iodine entered fields and food supplies. Contaminated milk was consumed by children throughout affected regions, including me. Years later, many developed thyroid cancer. Survivors would spend decades wondering whether a diagnosis, an illness, or a loss was connected to that single fated night. Could the disaster at Chernobyl be what has caused so many of us to suffer? But the damage was not only physical. Entire communities disappeared, families lost homes and routines, people struggled with fear and anxiety. The government provided us with such a lack of information, we would never feel at ease. We became refugees from an invisible enemy. Years later, victims of the Chernobyl disaster would struggle with not just their physical health, but with post-traumatic stress and other anxiety disorders. Today, when people visit Pripyat, they see empty buildings and silent streets. They call it a ghost town. But a ghost town is simply a place where memories remain after people are gone. So here I am. Here I am back in my home, hoping the streets and the buildings can one day be filled with life again. I am the ghost of Pripyat, and my city still waits for its people.
Remain calm. The situation is under control. Those words were repeated again and again after the disaster. They were broadcast over television and radio and shared by government officials. But behind the scenes, confusion, fear, and uncertainty spread through government offices. Officials face a difficult decision: tell the public everything immediately, or protect the image of the Soviet state and avoid widespread panic. The accident occurred during a late-night safety test at reactor number 4. Human error combined with serious reactor design flaws created a sudden power surge that operators can no longer control. Within seconds, explosions tore through the reactor building, releasing massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The result was catastrophic. Yet, the truth was not immediately shared with the people who were in the greatest danger. Instead of warning nearby communities right away, officials delayed public announcements. Residents of Pripyat continued their daily routines for more than a day after the explosion. Children went to school, families spent time outside, Public gatherings continue as if nothing had happened. Many people unknowingly walk through radioactive fallout, completely unaware of the invincible danger surrounding them. Emergency workers and firefighters were not sent to the scene with very little understanding of the radiation levels they faced. Many believe they were responding to an ordinary industrial fire. They worked courageously to contain the flames and prevent an even larger disaster, but many received life-threatening doses of radiation because they had not been given complete information. The disaster became impossible to hide when radiation monitoring stations in Sweden detected unusually high levels of radioactive contamination. Scientists investigated and eventually traced the source back to the Soviet Union. Only after international tension and pressure continued to grow did Soviet leaders publicly acknowledge that a serious accident had occurred at Chernobyl. Critics argue that the government's secrecy made the disaster far worse than it needed to be. Every hour mattered. Every warning mattered. Earlier evacuations and more honest communication could have reduced radiation exposure for thousands of people living nearby. Instead, valuable time was lost while officials debated how much information should be released. As more details became public, trust in the government began to disappear. Citizens questioned why they had not been warned sooner. They wondered when political reputation had been placed ahead of public safety. Many people realized that the greatest danger was not only the radiation itself, but also the lack of truthful communication during a national emergency. The effects reached far beyond borders of the Ukraine. Radioactive contamination spread across much of Europe, reminding the world that disasters of this scale do not stop at national boundaries. Governments around the world began reviewing nuclear safety procedures and emergency response plans, while international organizations called for greater cooperation and transparency whenever nuclear accidents occurred. Historians now point to Chernobyl as one of the major turning points in Soviet Union history. Even Mikhail Gorbachev later acknowledged the significance of the disaster. He admits that Chernobyl exposed serious weaknesses within the Soviet system and accelerated demands for greater openness, honesty, and reform. Discussions about transparency, accountability, and government responsibility could no longer be ignored. The reactor explosion was a technological disaster. The silence that followed became a political disaster, a change for the relationship between the Soviet government and its citizens, and its lesson continued to influence emergency planning and government transparency around the world. I am the voice of the Soviet government. Sometimes what is not said can be just as dangerous as what is.
Most disasters end. The fires were extinguished, the rubble cleared away, and life slowly returns to normal. But Chernobyl never ended. Even after the flames died and Chernobyl disappeared from the sky, something remains, something invisible, something deadly. Radiation seeps into the earth itself. It settled into this forest, poisoned the river, contaminated the soil, and slightly spread to every little thing that remains. The disaster no longer belongs to the reactor. It belongs to the land. The insects, the fungi, and the microorganisms responsible for breaking down dead plants and animals had been damaged by radiation. Leaves remained on the forest floor for years. Fallen trees lingered unnaturally. It was as if the forest itself had forgotten how to die. And the wildlife suffered as well. Researchers documented animals with tumors, cataracts, deformities, developmental abnormalities, and reduced fertility. Some creatures were born with mutations caused by radiation exposure, and others simply vanished. Scientists have studied these animals, searching for answers hidden within their DNA. But nature had one more surprise. When the humans fled, the animals returned. The wolves emerged from the shadows. Deer wandered through abandoned streets. Wild boar rooted through empty villages. Lynx stalked silent forests where children once played. The exclusion zone became a strange kingdom where nature's reclaimed humanity's ruined. Yet the danger never left. This soil that I am standing on still carries radioactive isotopes such as cesium-137 and strontium-90. These materials entered the food chains, and then they still remain subject of constant monitoring. Water systems were contaminated as radioactive particles entered the rivers, lakes, wetlands, and groundwater. One explosion in one night, and decades later, the land still is contaminated. And the people are still paying. The story is still being written. The reactor stopped burning, but Chernobyl never stopped haunting the world, and I, and the keeper of the exclusion zone and the land, remembers everything.